This is Hanging with Education, and this is a forum to discuss all kinds of things that help educators around the country. Every week we meet for an hour. Just kind of talk shop, share some resources, share some ideas and pedagogy, and really explore some of the interesting things we might be able to throw into our toolbox and different ways to use things. Tonight we're going to explore programming and the whole concept of I'm a teacher, I appreciate that programming is powerful, but I really don't know how to get started with any of this, and I don't feel comfortable teaching programming. So how do I bring that into my classroom or to some of my learners? And Lisi says, hi, Ed, looking forward to a whole new area for me. Lisi, I think you're probably in the majority for most of us in adult education. We don't come with a whole lot of programming background. You will not need to take notes because I do have all the information available on the website. And for those of you who have not been to the website, let me bring you there just so everybody can have all the links they would like so they can play with the resources as we get to them. And I'm going to bring you right here. If you go to 5squared.us and just hit enter, it'll bring you to my consulting page, and the first tab, Hanging with Education, the second tab, Hanging with Education, should bring you to the list for tonight, and you'll see a plethora of links that we'll be taking a look at. I had a difficult time trying to pare down all these links for today because there are so many resources, and I've studied programming for a number of years since I got out of college way back when, not quite before DIRT, but definitely a long time ago. And some of the resources that are available today, I wish they were available when I was, learning the computer trade, because they're wonderful. It's so easy to get into. So let's take a look at the concept of I just want to try and dip my toe in, maybe for an hour. Every year around the country, there's something called the Hour of Code. And you can find this at code.org. And if you're on the website with the resources, it's the very first link, code.org. And at code.org, there are a number of activities created specifically with the mindset of people are going to spend just an hour playing with this whole idea of programming and what it might look like and feel like. What can we set up so people can experience what programming's like? So there are a ton of one-shot activities that I would encourage you to check out on this site. So here we have partner tutorials that teach JavaScript. So we'll talk about JavaScript in a minute and all the different programming languages. But you can see here that there are a number of things that people can participate in to just check things out. Down here below, partner tutorials grade K through 8. So if you're working with younger students, in adult ed, obviously, that may not apply to us directly. But, some of our learners have kids who are in K through 8, and they would love to learn to program with their kids. So having access to some younger material is always beneficial, especially when we talk about parents and children doing things together and learning together. Some of us don't have the internet or computers available in our classroom. So they have a whole section on how do you program without a computer. And this will be fascinating for people to look at and say, wait, I could learn how to program without a computer? You can, but please don't expect that you're going to be able to make the next, Pokemon Go game with paper and pencil, although you might be able to make a very interesting game or program. It's probably going to be working on learning the logic of what's going on. Down here, when we talk about phones and tablet, is another category of gaming, and these are one-shot activities that get you working on how do I program for a tablet, and what does that feel like? If you'll see these little puzzle pieces, this started with a program from MIT they started making these little puzzle pieces into a program that's called Scratch. And a lot of programming, especially introduction to programming, uses little puzzle pieces where things just snap together. So you're not worried about ugly syntax and where the period has to go and semicolons and all this other stuff that was quite prohibitive when you were learning languages way back in the day before everybody had personal computers available. So then we have other programming languages, and of course we have lesson plans, which is cool because we can take a look at how are other teachers using things. And down below, there's a comprehensive list of Hour of Code tutorials. So even the wealth of information they offer on this one site isn't everything that you might want to look at for the Hour of Code. So there's a whole comprehensive list here at the bottom you may want to explore. Let me just check to see if there's any questions or comments on that resource. So let's talk about different ways some of our learners may want to start learning about programming. One of the easiest ways to program is through something called HTML, and that's basically the language of the internet. All of this whole web page has elements of HTML. In fact, if I right-click on this page and go down here to inspect, you can do this on almost any web page, you will see down here a bunch of code and a whole bunch of geekiness show up. This code, you can see right up here, it says HTML class details. You might not be able to see because my screen may not have a high enough resolution for you to see it. But right here, it just says HTML class. This is all code for HTML. Now, there may be other programming languages embedded in this, but the backbone of the entire internet is HTML code. So this is kind of an eye-opener for people to realize, wait, all these pretty pictures and everything else, that's just this? And they start scrolling through and they're like, well, where are the pictures? And this is the whole page? You're kidding me. That amount of text right here is this whole page. So just getting them to explore what HTML is and what's possible can be eye-opening that, wow, there's a lot of power here. And it turns out that HTML is also one of the easiest things to learn. So how do we learn that? One of the resources I have for you again on the website, it's right here under W3 Schools. W3 Schools is a free service. Everything I'm showing you today, by the way, is free. I don't deal with things that cost money very much unless somebody gives them to me. And I realize that most adult educators don't have a whole lot of money to throw around for their classroom. W3 Schools is free, and it's been around for a long time. They've been teaching people online for some time, and some of you are going to say, wow, I never knew this was here. How did I miss this? You can see here learning HTMLs on the side. CSS is formatting for the HTML code. HTML code is pretty basic, but then CSS gives it all the whiz bangs and pretty looks that we like to see in a web page. And learning these two, HTML and CSS, is great if a learner wants to work on developing web pages, making web pages interactive. And there's a ton of other languages here. JavaScript, why don't we just go through some of the other languages here that are listed. JavaScript is something that's usually used in HTML code to add a little bit more interactivity. It is based off of Java, and it is a flavor that integrates well with HTML. And then if I come down here a little bit more, there's something called server side. If I want people interacting with other people on the internet, I typically have to have a server that interacts with all the data that has to go back and forth. So there are things like SQL, they call that SQL. So SQL is a language that's used for database creation and access. PHP is a program that integrates with browsers so they can access that data easily. Same thing with ASP and ASP.NET. So all these languages here are all, I want to get into the juicy data. So I want to build a business site. I probably, I want to work for businesses and make data storage sites for them. You probably want to get into the server side of programming. And then, of course, there's template sites and everything else, and XML, which is a flavor of HTML, and it used to be something a little bit more powerful than the original HTML. Currently, HTML5, version 5 is out. And HTML is, first of all, designed by a number of people from around the world, get together and just say, hey, we need a communal language for programming for the web. And they design up the code and the syntax and everything else. So HTML5 is currently much more advanced than XML or HTML. And some of the tutorials I'll show you later actually deal with that. One of the highlights of W3 Schools is you could try it yourself. So if we click over here on Try It Yourself, it says this is a heading. Well, if I come over here and I just do the traditional hello world, I can now hit run and we can see how my web page changes. So students are able to type in text and immediately see the results without having to post things out, go to a website to look at it, or any of these complicated things. I can learn from their program, come in and try it, and I get to see immediate results. Really super fun to get instant feedback. Now, when you really get into programming, you have to do a lot of work before you end up seeing results. So having this instant feedback with HTML is really positive and brings successes really quickly, which is a highlight for HTML. Just checking on the questions again real quick to see if anybody's thrown any questions in there. Doesn't look like it yet. I want to bring you to this graphic. I just started going through an overview of some of the types of programs, and I'm going to zoom in on this a little bit. Let me check to see how that looks. Okay, that's probably enough for you to read. If I go to the Hanging with Education site, it's which language. That is the link I'm looking at right now. And in the top right-hand corner, they have a number of symbols that represent different languages. And they have a flow chart, and you start right here in the middle of the flow chart. Let me move my cursor over here a little bit. And it says, why do you want to learn programming? And there's a bunch of options. If you want to learn it for your kids, they tell you to start with Scratch. Then move on to this symbol, if I look up top, is for Python. So they're saying, if you want to work with kids, go through Scratch, then to Python. David has a question. Does W3 Schools stand for Worldwide Web Schools? I believe that is correct, David. They started off simply with HTML coding as their primary focus. And since WWW stands for World Wide Web, and it is one of the main protocols of HTML, they thought that was a clever name, W3 Schools. If you want to learn languages because someone told you should just learn a language, I don't know, just pick one for me. Python is the one people typically tell you, hey, why don't you start there? If you're learning just for fun, or I'm interested, or I want to improve myself, I've got a brilliant idea, but I'm just not sure what to do, you could follow that over. And it's like, well, do I know which platform I want to build for? Yeah, well, maybe I do. So then I can follow this down. If I want to build for the web, well, there's some other choices. So this gets pretty complex. And it's like, okay, do you want to try something new with a huge potential but less mature? They're saying JavaScript. All right, no, I'd like something else. Come over here. Well, do you like Legos, Play-Doh, or I have an old and ugly toy, but I love it so much. So there's a little bit of humor in here. Lego is Python, and this diamond symbol is Ruby. That's the Play-Doh. And then PHP. You got an ugly toy, but you love it so much. So there's a little bit of humor in here, but this is a pretty good flow chart. When you're working with learners and you ask them, well, what do you want to program for? Why do you want to learn programming? And especially with WIO coming down and in place now, get a job, that's probably going to be the main path we want to go down. So now we have to choose, well, who are you programming for? And I think this is good for novice programmers to realize that when you make a program, you really have to make it for a specific language. There's not like a universal language that plays nice with all devices and all operating systems out there. I do see we have a few other questions. Lisa's sharing that she's used W3 to figure out how to use Dreamweaver. Dreamweaver is a web authoring tool. It does have a free version, or it did have a free version, but it is a for cost, and it is super powerful. She said W3 is a nice site. I learned a lot. Thank you for sharing that, Lisi. And also, Lisi shares, I like the chart with the options. I wonder how to get an adult student or my 13-year-old grandson engaged. Where do I start with the flow chart? I have a personal preference myself, but when you see some of the tools here, it may become a little easier because obviously you know the people involved a lot more. And I'll highlight towards the end, if somebody likes quick instant gratification, you might want to go to this tool. If they don't mind working a little bit, this one has the bigger payoff. And then if they really, really, really want to get into programming and they expand on, they expect to do this for a living, you might want to start with this area. So I'll try to give a summary of those three towards the end when we see some of the tools. Down here, when you notice you're going to mobile, you have to choose an operating system. The Apple operating system is completely different from the Android operating system. So you're going to end up having to learn multiple programs in order to prepare a game or an app or something for everybody to access. That's why, some people concentrate on web development because everybody can access the web, in which case maybe JavaScript or maybe Java itself might be a place to start. The problem I'm having with Java is it is a great background for everything, but the Java plugins, which are little programs that attach to your browser, have often been clunky and security leaks for a lot of browsers. So you'll notice that a lot of browsers are abandoning JavaScript support, which can be a problem if you're looking to use Java specifically to write coding just for the web. So this flowchart is great. I do encourage you to print it off because when I'm looking at it zoomed in right now, and it's still kind of small. I'm thinking some of my adult learners whose eyesight may not be really great, this is still kind of small. I would want to blow this up before I print it out. Now, I want to point out on the bottom, any of you who are Lord of the Rings followers, they even broke down each of the languages into different characters from the movie, which could be nice, because a lot of our adult learners have movie references. They have a star rating up on top, so you get a relative difficulty of the language. Is HTML5 replacing Java? David Rosen asks. Yes, it is. The standard for many people is to change over to HTML5 if they're designing specifically just for web applications. It doesn't necessarily work super well with all the mobile devices, but it's designed to have the framework too. There's still a little bit of tweaking. That is, can you do things in HTML5 you have needed Java until now? Yes. HTML5 rather, comes with a base set of libraries, and people are expanding on those libraries now to enable you to do most everything that Java was able to do. Some of the limitations might be there are so many different resolutions, and to make a dynamic application on a web that works with all resolutions, all operating systems, everything else, there's still a lot of work. I mean, that's where a lot of the work is compatibility. But the power's all still there. Java was nice because Java said, here, do it our way, and then all the other browsers had to conform to Java, which is why a lot of browser creators don't really like it so much. It's funny, when you're building your own tool, you don't want to have to conform to someone else's tool. Well, HTML5 is kind of like an open sandbox where it's like, hey, take the parts you need. We got all the parts here. Put them together how you need them. Back to the Lord of the Rings listing here. One thing that is really good to share with learners, besides some of the rationale for each programming language, you look at the popularity, the number of stars, and then look what it's used to build. People think of Python as, oh, that's just something they might use in college, or not even college because it's not that robust. But YouTube was designed on Python. Instagram, Spotify, you might have heard of these things. These were all done in Python. So a very, very entry-level program could be used for incredible power. And of course, I don't know too many of us in adult ed who wouldn't mind getting that kind of salary. And they do over here have indications of what kind of software development. This is web. This is for desktops. So Python is typically used for web development and for desktops. And over here, you'll see a symbol for mobile apps for the Java. And then over here, just mobile apps and desktops for C. And you can see I like to use to build, because when my learners look at this, they know what Minecraft is. And they're like, what? Minecraft was built with Java? Okay, that's what I want to learn. You know, they have associations with a lot of these tools, and they start thinking, okay, I'd like to explore how that looks and what my options might be here. So WordPress, Wikipedia, Flickr, these are a little older. Remember PHP being that ugly old toy that you can't throw away? Well, that in its day was the bomb. That was the way to interact with data through the internet, was PHP for a lot of people. Now things have replaced it. Again, HTML5 and the libraries that come with that are much better today for that. And then, of course, they have a list down at the bottom where you can go to some tutorials on stuff. There are tons of tutorials on almost any language you choose. The question now is, what do some of these languages look like for people wanting to start out? I mentioned the HTML tutorial. Well, here's another one. And again, if you go to, I'm at the HTML link under Exploring Options on the 5squared.us site. And this HTML site, what I like about this is some of my learners are used to books, and they're used to chapters, and they're used to, you know, the idea of a page, and, you know, reading digitally is a little more difficult for them. So this one, you can actually print this off as a PDF. So a student may not have computer access all the time. This nice little PDF version button is very handy for the learners who may not have computer access all the time. Now, I've heard an argument, and some of you programmers out there are probably smacking your forehead saying, no, you can't learn programming from just reading a book. And they're absolutely right. Programming is one of those things that you can learn syntax by reading a book. Like this syntax down here, I can get everybody in here to memorize this as to what all these parts do. But to really understand the thinking behind programming you have to do it. You have to mess up. You have to purposely destroy the code to figure out how it works. If you are not into destruction, if you've never built something in Legos and said, that was cool, and immediately destroyed it, just so you can see how you can build it again in different ways, if you don't have that kind of spirit, programming may be very difficult for you to try. Because to really get inside the mind of how a computer works, you have to get in and make a mess and learn from that mess. So for concrete sequential learners, programming can be really a challenge, because they want to get it right the first time. They don't want to make mistakes. The advantage of this, of course, is you have the try it button here, and they do have an option for you to type in the code, and you immediately get to see the results over here. And again, I'm just going to come over here and change in, hi everyone. And maybe instead of H1, I'm going to change that to an H2. You know, I see a number there, and I just want to figure out, what does H2 mean? So knowing nothing about HTML, of course I do, but knowing nothing about it, I just wanted to see what would happen with this. I hit execute. Oh, wow. The whole font changed and everything else. H2 stands for header 2. It's usually like a subheader. Header 1 is the main bold title. Header 2 is a smaller one. Header 3 will be for another smaller one. And so this is formatting in HTML. So if you ever see the H with a number after, it's usually referring to a header style. And in CSS, you can change what all those things are. Sorry to get a little geeky on you, but I just wanted to show you how you don't have to understand all this to start playing with it and immediately learning, how does this work? So I love these sites that have that try it now. And I did point this out because you can print off. You can find all kinds of stuff to print off and give people, but you want to warn them that they're not going to learn the thinking behind the programming until they get in and start playing. So one of the best and easiest ways for a novice teacher who's never taught programming to get in this and get learners learning with them, it was developed by MIT. It's Scratch. And if you want, I'm on the link that says Scratch and, I accidentally got the and highlighted. I'll fix that after the session here. But if you click on Scratch and, that'll bring you to MIT site with Scratch. This was wonderful. This was one of the first attempts to basically say, let's remove all that nasty syntax stuff and all these keywords. Let's remove that from the whole equation and see how people gravitate to programming. I have worked with learners as young as 3rd grade, and they have been able to make interactive games where they're racing around the screen and stuff like that and have collisions. And if 3rd graders can handle moving puzzle pieces around, adults feel a little less intimidating. Plus, it's bright and colorful. So let's take a look at this. I don't have to download anything. I could try it out right now. So I'm going to try it out. Now, when I click try it out, sometimes these programs may ask you to log in. And very often they may ask you to log in with like a Google account. That's so you can save your work and so you can access it again. Lisi's sharing, it's a great site. Didn't know it was MIT. I'll have to share that. In my personal opinion, Lisi and everyone else, I feel that MIT and their games group is doing more to make programming and game design and game building part of the educational cycle for everyone. And I'm going to show you some resources here just within Scratch that they've done up that can be life-changing for some of the options your learners have. So I have this little cat, and you notice I can move him around the screen. But as I'm moving him around the screen, take a look at these blue buttons in here and notice what you see changing. So even if you have one computer with a projector, not everybody has a computer, you can start using inquiry learning and discovery learning. Students can start observing what does change. Well, how about down here? You see the X and Y. They may be familiar, depending on their level of learning, what X and Y means, but where should 0, 0 be? Well, they might say in the middle. So I come right here towards the middle. It's like, is it? Well, it looks like actually this one is kind of towards 0, 0. I have to move my mouse a little bit, and screen resolution on the screen you're looking at is it's quite small. So I do apologize. You may not be able to see that. Let me see if I can zoom in. Now that'll make it grow. I'm going to try to zoom in on my browser and see if that just, no, it won't do it. Because of the coding on the site, they won't allow me to zoom in with the browser zoom. So I have this cat. I want to get him to move. I have a programming area, which is this blank gray area on my screen. I'm just going to move the move step over here. And every time I click it, it moves. So you can see that cat moving around the screen slowly. So when it says 10 steps, another question I ask students, well, is that inches? Is that centimeters? I mean, what are they using for scale here? And we start learning that, oh, computers measure things in pixels. Now I can change that through the settings. I can change it to centimeters or inches. Please don't change it to inches. It is such a bear with small spaces to take, 1/64th of 5/780ths. It's nuts. Do yourself a favor, get the metric system, just move a decimal point. It makes life so much easier in programming. So it's not just the rest of the world that uses metrics. Programmers get really comfy with metrics real quick. So I'm going to change this move to 100 pixels instead of 10. Now when I click it, you'll notice that my cat moves considerably faster. And if I put a negative 100 in there, whoops, I have to type without clicking on it, negative 100, it'll move him back. So now we get the idea of negative movement and positive movement, but why is it just horizontal? How do I get him moving up? How do I get him moving down? Well, now we can start turning him in different directions. We can have him point in certain directions or point to a specific degree measurement. So maybe I want to have it point, and it even tells you here which one's left, right, up, or down. So maybe I want to point in direction 0 and then move negative 100. What do you think will happen if I face up and then move negative 100? And of course, if we had live interaction here, I know some of you can type it. So I'll give you a second to figure out what you might do here. But in a live classroom, they would have some conjectures as to what's going to happen. I think Lisi says, I think that a PD training just on this tool will be a good start. Lisi, I had exactly that idea. Tonight, It's just to show a little bit of flavor of each of the tools. And again, these tools I'm sharing tonight are just the tip of the iceberg. There are many more that have other positive and negative attributes. So I do agree. If people would like to see more of this, we could dive into one specific tool and spend a whole hour just getting people's feet wet and learning a little bit more of the basics. So definitely, I'll keep that in mind, Lacey. So pointing in the upward direction and moving negative 100 steps, when I click on that, it faced upwards and then moved negative where it was facing. So the idea of students who struggle with positive and negatives, what's the difference? Well, this facing thing and the movement with a negative value has helped a lot of my learners realize, oh, instead of going forward, I'm just going backwards. Now, we also talk about money. Instead of gaining money, I have debts. David's mentioning, Ed, if you've used Scratch with adult learners, can you tell us how they use it? I have used Scratch in credit recovery classes with students who are totally fed up with textbooks. And they're like, listen, I can't do textbooks. I can't do worksheets. That whole Khan Academy thing, I don't get it. And I start saying, well, how about programming? I can't do programming. I don't know. That's way too complicated. When I start showing them this 10 or 15 minutes in, they immediately start playing. And I let them play a little bit, and I start asking them questions. That is, what do they make? Almost all of them end up making games at first. But there is a gender bias. It turns out that MIT and other major organizations who've worked with trying to introduce youth and adults to programming, they find that boys or men will typically go towards games, violence, action. Collision detection is one of the first things after movement that they want to learn. Whereas this same tool has been used to make interactive storyboards. So you can actually make a whole digital story that's all interactive, kind of like Apple did with HyperCard back in the day. This is HyperCard on steroids. There's so much more you can do than what HyperCard had originally. It did develop into a robust tool as well. So I do see storyboarding and making interactive stories, and there is a little bit more of a bias towards females gravitating towards that application of the programming. So you'll see that, the gaming, the storyboarding, there was another one too. I've had a few students try to use programming as mathematical cheats. They would learn a mathematical operation, then they would write a program to do that very long operation and see if they can get it to work. Many of them end up a little frustrated because to really program something to do math, you need to understand that math at such a high level. They find some limitations, but that's a learning activity for them where they realize, wow, okay, there's a whole lot more to this than just click a few buttons and boom, I have a program. I was just showing off some of the tools in motion, but I do want to share that there are other libraries of tools. We can have it say text. We can have it think with a think bubble. We can have it disappear and show up somewhere else. There are tons of functionality here just in each of these categories. Lacey sharing, that's exactly how I advocate using comic strip and cartooning in adult ed. They love it, and the sites and many. That's right, there are many sites that do the comic stripping, if that's what you were referring to. And many gravitate to the storytelling as well. But again, the stories tend to be about, many of my male learners tend to have some negative themes associated with it for some reason. Well, usually some violence. I had one young teenager develop something about going through a bat cave and trying to wipe out all the bats with a badminton. And Lacey sharing this tool adds math to the equation. I was sharing a little bit earlier that I have some students who struggle with math and all the resources we have available, I've been able to help look at their math skills that they need and give them challenges within Scratch. Once they get familiar with the interface, and I'll show you how we do that in a minute. Once they get familiar with the interface, then I turn them loose on my math challenges I have for them. I don't call them math challenges. I call them programming challenges. And the learners, it's all individualized. So each learner would get a different challenge set. And the math development is so much easier. Like this negative motion thing, people who struggle with positive negatives, I give them a challenge, let's say, of, I would like him to follow the lyrics of this song. And the song says, you take 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, 3 steps forward, or I can't remember the exact lyrics at this time. Another student had a rap that was talking about distances and going back and forth. And I said, well, what if you combine all these lyrics that talk about directions? How would you make this figure dance? So they started collecting lyrics that all go in directions, and they talk about positives and negatives. And these are for learners who really just have always struggled. After that programming experience, I've noticed when I've gone back to worksheets and tests and more traditional materials, they didn't have as many of the struggles. They just had to remember, oh, that's just like when the cat was doing this or that and the other thing, which was really nice. We can add sounds in. The pen, I don't know if, I don't know how experienced people are in the audience, but you may remember something called Logo. Logo was one of the first programming languages accessible. This is back in the day of mainframes being the standard, and you had to get computer time at a university to get on there when Logo was coming around. And the idea was you had this little turtle. And effectively, this is built off of Logo. So MIT took, like, one of the historic grandfathers of programming, went right back to it because Logo was incredibly influential in starting our first wave of programmers in the programming history. So people, that was their easy access then, was Logo. They took Logo and added a ton of different nice flashy buttons on top of it. The pen is to draw. So I'm going to put pen down, for instance, and I'm going to have them go in direction 0 and move -100. You can see the line is drawn behind it. So maybe now under motion, I'll have it turn 15 degrees. Now he did turn, but unfortunately he's almost off the page. But now if I do it again, he's turning 15 degrees, but I always have it reset to 0, so we don't get to see it moving all the way. So let me pull that out of there, and I'll just move this back here to delete it. So now he moves. I'm going to change that to -10, just because the motion on that is quite far for this demonstration purpose. I'll move him up here. So now he's moving, and he's drawing this shape behind him. So again, we have applications to geometry. How do you make a circle? Well, you can define it as equidistant from a center point, or you could define it as you're moving consistently the same number of degrees of a turn and moving forward that same amount. Sorry, moving forward then turning. And David's pointing out that Logo was developed by Seymour Papert, who has relatively recently died. And for those of you not familiar with Seymour, he was a strong advocate of discovery learning, having learners learn in different ways. And some of the standards of teaching have been. Papert taught Logo to adult learners at okay, I don't know how to pronounce that, David, but a place in Massachusetts. And Sedalia Kallenbach was the program director there. Oh, awesome. That's cool. And I'm sorry if I'm butchering names. Having grown up without a foreign language background, my pronunciation is not always right. And yes, I did purposely pronounce that wrong. So I do apologize for butchering some people's names. I did want to point out that although this programming environment looks simple, they can add in data, start throwing variables in there, start throwing in lists, which start getting into the basics of databases. They teach Scratch at university levels in some places. Probably not to core programmers, but more for people who want to understand the thinking and logic behind computers, because it might apply to some business settings. Women United in Action, David's sharing. Okay. Real quickly on this tool, again, we could probably spend a whole hour on this, but I do want to get to some other tools. It has costumes, so you can do animation, and you can edit the costumes right here in Scratch. So if I wanted to just move an arm or make an eye blink, they have a whole set of tools here within the tool to set this up. I can also record my own sounds, and I can, so I can make my own sound effects in here. Now, one of the things that's really great about this whole tool for teachers especially, I'm going to go back to the Hanging with Ed site, and I have posted here the guide, one of the guides. MIT has put out tons of information to help teachers. But I wanted to show how, Lacey, you're whipping some Spanish at me. Thank you. Thanks a lot. At least you could be live on mic when you're whipping the Spanish at me. Although it's funny, I read languages much better than I understand them verbally. So let's get rid of Scratch here. I want to bring you to that PDF that I have linked just to show you how robust this is. If you are a teacher who's interested in having a student learn this, even though you may be ignorant of what Scratch is or how to do it, this manual gets everything going. First, getting started is just how to operate things. What are you pushing? What's the foundation of how this is set up? The exploring, they give some simple tasks. And then they get into animating, storyboarding. Okay, they start with the digital storyboarding. Then they go to games. And then they start getting into interaction. And they start getting into some bigger challenges. So I love this manual. If you're going to print it out, you might want to buy a printer, because 150 pages, that's a pretty big manual. So having one of these available in the classroom might be all you can afford based on your printing setup. Okay, David has shared the pronunciation. Mujeres Unidas in Acción is Women in Action. Interesting that all the adult learners learning Logo were women. David, you bring up an excellent point, and there's some historical documentaries, I believe, on Netflix about the pioneering women programmers who really did all the hard work. We've got all these I don't know if you've ever heard of the punch card system. Those punch card operators, the ones who are really doing all the programming in the back rooms that were like sweatshops for programmers, a lot of those were females, and they kicked butt. They did incredible innovations. And then the males, because it was a misogynistic society, got a lot of the credit. So that's I'm really glad that there's documentaries out there. And I encourage adult educators to share those with potential learners, because the demographics are pretty clear. There is a deficiency of females desiring to get into the computer programming fields as a profession. So another company said, we need to fix that. So I'm going to jump right ahead to that, because that kind of segues in. There's a program called Alice. And again, if I look at 5squared.us, it's down here. The word Alice will bring you to this site. Alice was designed specifically to try to equalize the gender gap. And they wanted to get something that would appeal more to young girls who were saying, programming might be cool, but I don't want to shoot space aliens or kill this big donkey that's throwing barrels at me and stuff. I just want to be able to tell stories and basically build their fantasy kingdoms or build their stories of strife or whatever they wanted to build. And they wanted a Lego kit for stories. So the group that made Alice, and I can't remember his name, he did incredible work. I'm so sorry. Carnegie Mellon University is where that came for, but there was Oh, he did something on TED called The Last Lecture. David, I'm sure you'll come to my rescue here. He was involved with the Alice generation. It's called The Last Lecture. If anybody wants to Google that real quick and drop me the line on that. He was a big push behind this movement for Alice. And what Alice is, you can see up here with the coding that's flashing on the screen. This one's not quite as pretty in terms of the coding part, because they really do teach you JavaScript, the basics of JavaScript, which is great if you're going to go in and do stuff on the internet. What was really cool was, if you've ever heard of EA Sports, they created a little program called The Sims. EA Sports has donated the entire graphics library, all of their tools, like a toaster oven, a refrigerator, everything from Sims 1, they donated to the Alice program. So all of those objects are available for people to use in their stories. And it's kind of like color forms. You open up a page, you drop down the color forms you like. I'm sorry if I'm dating people. Color forms was a plastic sticker set, if you will, and it had a cardboard with like a waxy scenery on it, and you can put the stickers on the scenery in whatever configuration you like, and then you can peel them off and stick them on again. At least he's defending that sometimes women just like to kill monsters too. And Lisi, as a gamer who plays online, I have a number of female friends that I game with that they definitely like to play games and kill things because they're doing it more hours than I get to, that's for sure. Alice is really great in that you have assets that students are familiar with. There's a lot of people who played The Sims. They've seen The Sims. They've seen those assets. And they can immediately start playing with those by just clicking on them, dragging them on the screen. And then if they'd like to change how they behave, that's when they can jump into the code and start that exploration of just poking here, poking there. This is free. They do have some research that's available for people to look at. And there's also, if you register as an educator with them, there's a ton of different materials that are available that you can use. And again, Alice is used in colleges, and it's also used by a few adult ed. I don't find too many adult eds that offer programming, but I have seen one or two try to play with it, particularly as a storyboarding, to make interactive storyboards with. But I like Alice. I haven't had enough time to play with that because there's so many different programming tools to play with. It's all great. Now today, obviously, app development for mobile devices is where it's at. And our good friends at MIT, they've hit it out of the park again. This is the link that says MIT App Inventor 2. Of course, they did have an App Inventor 1. This link, you may want to save this link somewhere special because it's not easy to find it all the time. I have to have it in my Diigo bookmarks, and I can't find it when I do web searches easily. When you go to MIT App Inventor 2, you do have to log in with a Gmail account. You'll notice my Gmail account's up here in the right-hand corner. And the reason for that is, as you do your projects, everything is automatically saved. So I'm sorry for those of you who get sick of me constantly promoting Gmail or Google, but Google's working with a lot of really important people when we talk about education, and MIT is one of them. So another good reason to jump on the Google bandwagon if you haven't yet. But I would like to start a new project. So I'm just going to click Start New Project, and I'm just going to say testing is the name. I'm going to hit OK. So now I can click on my new project that I've started, and I bring up a screen. This is a phone screen. In fact, if I want, I can change the settings of what screen I'm building for. So if I have a Samsung Galaxy 5, I may change the screen so it looks exactly like my phone. And let's say I want a button somewhere. I click on a button, I drag it over here, and I put it down. Now I get this button over here, and on the right-hand side, I can change a number of things. The background color is black by default, or is the default color rather. I can change that. Let's say I want it to be this magenta color. And maybe I want the text to be a different color. So I'm going to come down here and change the text color to white. So now I have a magenta button. That green outline here is kind of funky. So maybe I'd want to change that as well. I might want to change that border so it's not showing. This setup of draw what you want first and then change the properties, this is very reminiscent of Visual Basic for those of you who have seen that before. Visual Basic was taught in college when I was learning programming, and it was very much draw your interface, change your settings, and then you just had to program a few different procedures, and you had a program. It was really nice, and Visual Basic is still used for a lot of interactive programming on the web. But here we're talking about just something for phone development. I can do the same thing with a checkbox. Whoops, no, I did another button. So let me delete that one. Yep, delete that. Let me see if I can grab a checkbox this time. There's my checkbox, and maybe I want that to have a number of different things. The height is automatic. Maybe I want it to fill the whole phone, so it goes the whole length of the phone, so I can have a large checkbox for people to click on. Now, I'm just looking at the user interface. There's also layout, where I can talk about whether it's a horizontal arrangement, a table arrangement, vertical arrangement. These are all things people have to learn about. Well, if I don't know what a vertical arrangement is, I can click on this little question mark, and it tells me a little bit, and I can even go get more information about it. So again, we don't want people reading voluminous texts to try to learn programming. We want them clicking around and saying, oh, cool, what's this do? What's this cool? And then when they're ready, there's books that you can look at that will give them more of a sequential growth to learn the thinking behind it. But I do want to point out that down here, when you scroll all the way down here, you see Lego Mindstorms. How cool would that be? If you have some Lego Mindstorms, they're wicked expensive, but if you have them, now you can get your phone to be a remote control for a Lego robot you've made. How cool is that? So again, App Inventor is really neat. Once you're done creating this app, and again, if we want to spend a whole session on this, we could. I can now dump this app to my phone and try it right on my phone without having to send it to an app store. Maybe I want to share it with you. I can give you a link that will bring you to a copy of my app that you can download to your phone and try it before I even put it out on the App Store. So everything's here. And if you like to see the block coding that you saw in the other program, well, guess who created the block coding in the first place? MIT. So they have all the blocks are a little bit different, but all the logical blocks that you need, this is how you code the background behind the layout. I mean, it's just so cool. There's so much here to get excited about in terms of everyone can program. It's just a matter of what do you want to program? What are your aspirations? What do you want to do with it? And for a lot of people who struggle with, I don't know what I want to do in life, playing with programming gives them some options and directions. Because if you're programming for the web, there's a certain field of jobs that are available to you. If you're programming just that database stuff, tons of people need database support. And guess what? They get paid a pretty penny for that. So that's cool as well. We have just a few more minutes, so if you have questions, go ahead and fire them off. I do want to bring us to one more resource that I'd like to share tonight. This is called Extra Credits down here, and I put the title Motivational Viewing. And I really have, let me get rid of this. I have an affinity for what these people do. They not only promote gaming, which I am very passionate about, but they program. They share a lot of programming information. What do programmers do? How do games get designed? And they do a lot of research too. So things, I'll just look through the titles real quick. Let me go up to the videos first of all. This is a team of 3 people, and I think they might have expanded it to a few others. But they have a graphic artist who does all these little cute cartoons, which is part of their charm. They have kind of a techie guru, and they have a data person who really goes out and does a lot of the data crunching. But they have been putting out short little lessons. These are only like 8-9 minutes each. And things that are really, copyright dilemma. Well, they're talking about copyright. You know, I want to try that game, but that's from an illegal site. So what do I do about copyright? What if I make a game? How do I hold the copyright? So they have both of those aspects in different videos. So I don't remember which one this one is right here. All right, this is it. If you make the game, how do you get trademarks, copyrights, patents? You know, what is all that stuff? How do you protect yourself? And that's a simple little 6-minute video. And they go really deep in an entertaining way. I apologize for that. I can't impress enough how entertaining their work is and how informative it is. So if you do have a spare 10 minutes, I would grab that one I was just trying to show. It was called Classroom Metrics. So if you grab that one, let me stop sharing here. Classroom Metrics is the name of the video I was trying to share. And the reason I was trying to share that one with everybody is because it very, okay, thank you, Lisi, for verifying the video wasn't playing. The point of that article they did, that little short vignette, was that the game designers found out that if you just take a great game that's educational and everything and plop students in front of it, there's really no learning changes from control groups. If you just look at lecture, they had data of about 6% growth. Lisi, is the connection still lost? Or did it just skip for a little bit? I apologize for any technical difficulties. When they did a pre and post test of 3 control groups, the control group that just played games, there was only a 1% growth. For those who just had lecture, there was a 6% growth. And for those who had lecture and games, there was a 10% growth. So the video series highlights how games become an amplifier for learning. The teacher's required as part of the process. And not only that, the teacher has to be educated about how to use it. So I would leave everybody with that thought. Getting students hooked into the idea of programming is what this whole session was about. Then to take the next step, thank you, Lisi, for letting me know we're back on. To take the next step after you've got learners hooked, then teachers really do need to study this a little bit more or connect the learners to people who know a little bit more about programming, especially if you can find programmers in the field and set up some mentorship. That would be incredible. But that's not always available in our different geographic areas. So I hope you enjoy some of the resources I shared. Again, on the Hanging with Education site, I'm going to move this whole list down into the archive section down below here. But all these resources are still available. And if you have questions about any of those resources, you can, of course, email me or go to the Links Technology and Learning Community of Practice and post questions there. I do have a thread on Hanging with Education on the Links Network, and I know Lisi's been very nice in sharing those postings in other forums on the Links Network as well. So I'm thankful for everybody who came in, and please feel free to share all these great resources with colleagues. If we would like to have a session just on one of the tools, let's say Scratch, for instance, we can do that if you'd like. Or if there's another tool that you'd like to explore, let me know that as well. As always, on the Hanging with Education site, there is a suggested topics form. And I encourage any teacher who has a need, go ahead and plop down what you'd like, and we'll have that as a discussion. So until next Wednesday, I hope you guys have fun exploring all the programming possibilities. And I look forward to our discussions next week. Thank you all.